So we're here at the beautiful Gallery Corsica, and my guest today is Gary Naragon, and we're going to be chatting a little bit about your perspective on COVID-19 here in Puerto Vallarta. So I think first it's important to acknowledge that right now you're spending almost every day doing volunteerism, helping out with food.
Just within the last week now.
Yeah, for the last week or so.
Yes.
Helping out with a food crisis project.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
The Baptist church that you and I attend, the Spanish part of it is having meals for the homeless.
They're cooking,
Yes.
and they're serving
They're
meals,
preparing for food, and
lunches.
then we hand it out to them at 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
It's amazing. So almost every day.
3 or 4 days
Yeah.
a week, yeah.
So anyone who's having a food crisis or shortage at this time,
Right.
which has
It's-
really been almost
It's
immediate.
pretty much, yes, it's pretty much the homeless people that are coming, but there has been a couple families.
Families too.
So the word is spreading, so
Great.
we'll probably have maybe a few more coming next week.
That's phenomenal. And you're there serving food to these folks who need it.
Yes,
And you're choosing to go without a mask,
I do, yes.
but some of the
Most of the other ones,
Service.
the actual ones that are dealing with the people, they'll wear the gloves and the mask. You know,
Right.
handing the food out,
yeah,
I'm mainly there to wash
help.
up afterwards.
yeah. But
And
you're making a huge
anything else you
commitment.
need me to do. so.
Almost every day you're doing this.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that you have a really interesting story, and you're really sort of a classic tale of living in paradise. You owned and grew and scaled and sold a family-owned business in the United States.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And you were in the engineering and
No,
construction
we were,
sector?
construction, but we put in automatic sprinklers, fire protection systems.
Okay.
The company that we had it for almost 20, 25 years, or 20 years, I guess it is.
Fantastic.
We sold that in 2008, and Susie and I moved, my wife and I, we moved here, excuse me, almost full-time at that, well, not full-time, but
Yeah, you
We did.
transitioned here,
Yeah.
to Puerto Vallarta. And at that point, what I understand is that you really became very involved in social impact work here in Vallarta with construction and
actually,
homes,
we
right?
had been doing that before we sold the company.
Wow,
We've been doing it since 92 or 93 was our first house that we was involved in.
Mhm.
And then after the one guy retired from it, we took it over from him, and we built about 4 or 5 until it got too expensive for, well, in 92, I think it was 90 something, is when the depression, the market fell out.
sure,
And a lot of our suppliers just couldn't fund us anymore. And
yeah.
Susie and I, we couldn't afford to do a whole house by ourselves.
So what was the transition like coming to this market here and jumping into the construction and building industry in Puerto Vallarta?
Not really that much difference, because I had been in Ecuador and Dominican Republic,
Yes,
and it was all involved in construction to
yeah,
churches and
yeah.
buildings.
So you had some practice with this kind of style.
And I
of
have
working.
a sort of a background, my father and grandfather on both sides were in construction, so.
Yeah. So having lived through several enormous economic shifts, you mentioned the economic shift in the 90s and certainly 2008 to 2010.
Yes.
You had some knowledge of that. How do you perceive the economic changes to take place here in Puerto Vallarta's business community?
Before we bought, there was economic depression here
Yeah,
at that time. And that's when the U.S. government bailed out Mexico a little bit, because
that's right.
the peso was changing and everything. They reevaluated the change. So, you know, while we've been here for the 20-some years or so, we've seen a lot of economic problems here.
Sure. So what would you say to business owners today facing this challenge?
This one here, I think, is probably going to be the worst that they've had. And
That's great news,
the swine fuel one,
right?
they had, Puerto Vallarta at that time had nothing but bad publicity from the US and Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone was hesitant to come to Puerto Vallarta. And then on top of that, they had the cartels.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but the cartel to us was only on the border towns. We didn't, I don't
Right,
think,
not here
I have
in
never
Vallarta.
had any problem
Sure.
and my wife Susie, we've never had any problem here in Puerto Vallarta. But
So would you say to owners of businesses here in Vallarta that the same kind of fear of coming back or the same need to encourage people to come back might be a factor?
Puerto Vallarta may have to really do some hard publicizing. The one thing that I see that's beneficial for Puerto Vallarta, we haven't had that many deaths here. I think maybe a total of 3 deaths, and
There are
not that
4
many cases.
reported deaths at this point, and there are only a couple of hundred in the entire
I think
state
it
of
was
Jalisco,
398 cases.
which puts it at, at the very low end
Right.
globally.
Yeah, that's, I sort of figured it out with my math as best I
Right,
could.
we're all
You know,
watching the
we're
stats
talking
on a daily basis.
1/2 of 1%.
Right. Population size,
With the
correct.
population wise.
So you foresee some heavy marketing, some significant reinvestment in PR, certainly because of the tourism driver to the city. What else do you foresee, given your long history here?
This is my opinion. I'm not an economist or anything else, but in my opinion, you might as well forget the tourists on the ships.
So the cruise
For
industry.
the cruise
right?
ships industry, it's going to take a while for them to recover. But even if the tourists come down by plane, it's still going to take a while. But the
So there'll be
economy,
a recovery period.
yeah, the economy will recover, but it's going to take a year or so. I know. Well, a lot of it all depends on when the government will say, okay, we're going to go back to normal.
Sure. Right.
If they do it very slowly, open a few stores at a time,
Right.
don't open the beaches for another 15, 20 days or something like that.
Sure.
Maybe only part of the beaches too. Don't let
Sort of
To keep-
phase back in
right,
type
to
approach.
phase everything back in and then have the media publicize that to,
Positive media campaigns, right? Which we've seen in the past, and I think Puerto Vallarta as a city
Yes,
does
I think Puerto
extremely
Vallarta
well
is-
that kind of marketing
yes.
and kind of reassurance to home buyers and owners and residents here that things are tranquil and safe. Yeah, I think that we have a long history of succeeding when there's been some news to communicate. So as of today, as of this interview, we're about halfway through the governor's 30-day
Right, because it's 30
stay
days.
home, right, which is working very well. But you actually have been very active in town. You run very early in the morning. You walk around town, so you see a significant part of the city during the day. And for the very few businesses or cafes are open, I think that you've really kept your eye on what's happening in town. Do you feel like overall people are staying home and businesses are closed?
Up until yesterday, the foot traffic was very minimal, morning and afternoon. There wasn't that many private cars on the streets.
That's right.
But
That's right.
yesterday it seemed like the
It was
foot
a
traffic was a little
spike.
bit more.
Right.
And it was 15, 16 days as of yesterday.
So
People are going to,
fatigue.
they're going to start,
halfway
they're going to start, regardless of the restrictions the government puts
Yeah.
on you, you have to get out.
Yeah. Well, let's face it, the weather is pretty perfect.
Yes.
Mid-80s, lovely breeze. It's difficult to stay home for more than 50 days when the
Right.
climate is so pretty. Yeah. So for the business owners themselves, Gary, as you kind of see the recovery coming back from this, what advice would you, as a successful business owner, give to the proprietors and the entrepreneurs in this town on how to sustain themselves and come back and flourish after this?
That's a really hard question. You just have to believe and have faith.
Yeah.
That's the best thing I can, because the nice thing that I can see, and I talked to the owner at C. Seniors, and just before he closed, we were talking about it. If this had to happen, it was a good time to happen when it did, because it was almost to the end
Right
of the
before low season.
right before this low season started. A lot of your smaller business, they may not ever recover. They may just wind up
Yeah.
closing their doors. But the bigger ones, if they're smart, which I'm sure they are, they've saved.
They prepared
They
for it
prepared
because
for
there
it.
is a low season
Right.
in this community. So we've heard this from others, that in fact it's just an earlier start maybe to low season, and those businesses that are long tenured in the city have a sense of that cycle and know how to,
Right.
to kind of rein it in and withdraw during the low season.
The people that I really feel sorry for is everybody are the vendors, the small vendors on this,
Sure.
that rely
Independent
on
sellers on the
rely
street.
on a daily basis.
Right.
They don't make that much in the first place, but yet they're out there. There's still some out there.
So that's very true of Vallarta. As much glamour and affluence as there is in this town, I think that there's a very wide population at the base of the pyramid who does rely on a daily wage or maybe street sales, street vendors who are immediately out of business today because there is no walking traffic, like you said. So I've actually noticed that right away people are selling masks on the street.
Yes.
They might be selling bandanas or things that people are needing right now. So there is a very strong sense of adaptability, right?
That's one thing I've always liked about the Latin American countries. They can adapt faster than
Right.
the U.S. or your
Adapt and thrive.
right.
Well, I think that's probably the most profound advice that we've heard today is the idea of adapting very quickly to thrive in a new economy. And I would say that it applies as much to the street vendors as it does any other businesses here in town. And I think that's really sage advice from a long tenured entrepreneur like you. So thank you for chatting with
You're
us
welcome.
today,
Thank you.
Gary. It's a pleasure, and really thank you for all the work that you're doing at
Just
the
do what I
food
can.
pantry to feed those that need